Welcome to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. I'm your host, Mari Riesberg. Over the past several years, I've combined my degrees in acting and somatic psychology to share my sustaining creativity techniques with performers. And now I've decided to share it with a bigger audience that includes you. I believe we are all creative, and this podcast is all about that. I'll be interviewing people from all backgrounds, ages, and creativity experiences to share just how creative we all are. Today, I'll be chatting with Jack Canfora, playwright and the artistic director of New Normal Rep. Please enjoy Jack Canfora. Welcome to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. Today I am here with Jack Canfora, playwright and the artistic director of New Normal Rep. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm excited to chat with you about creativity and kind of your take on theater and creative experiences and creative processes. But before we get there, why don't you take a couple of minutes and let our listeners know a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Well, like I said, I'm a playwright, and I am also the artistic director of New Normal Rep, which is actually an online theater company.
Oh.
And so we have a few productions out. One is a radio play, a radio play that's available on all podcast platforms, and I'll plug that later. We have a YouTube page with a full-length play and a few shorter pieces. And last season we did four full productions of online plays, which aren't like Zoom, but are designed to kind of be coherent in the sense, visually coherent in the sense that everyone looks like they're in the same place, even though the season we recorded was during the pandemic, and so we were all in different places, and that was actually the inspiration for it.
Nice. So I imagine, so this theater company kind of came out of the pandemic.
Precisely, yeah. We gathered on Zoom every week to read plays and just kind of to hang out, frankly. And then after a while, we realized that we liked this group of actors, and we felt that there was a need because, a lot of the people were trying to do online plays in those days, and it was generally everyone was sort of feeling their way through it, and we felt there was probably a good way of doing it. And although obviously it's not like being in a theater, I mean, there's nothing like that.
Right.
Most people don't really watch plays, let's face it, and when they do, it's a musical, and so it's a very limited experience for most people, and a lot of people don't even think of it ever. Sort of, it's not on their radar. And I think two of those reasons are geography and expense, and this cuts through both. So if you have internet connection, basically you can watch our full productions. I think we're like $20, and we had discounts, and the radio play, which is called Step 9, that's free. So we really just want to sort of democratize theater and get it out there, and get people interested in the idea of plays, and sort of just let them know what a great thing plays can be. Nice.
Now, for our listeners who don't know what a radio play is, would you mind?
Well, it's just a term that I'm sort of making up. it's just a play that's read, done, in the old days it was done on the radio. And so, there's, it's like an audio play, really, is what it is. It's like an audiobook, but it's acted out. Sound effects and the soundscape and that sort of thing. So that's basically what I mean.
Nice. I'm sure for some of our listeners, they may never have heard an audio play before with everything streaming now. So that's really exciting to kind of introduce that to a whole new group of people.
Yeah, it's starting to come out a little bit. They're starting to gain some popularity, although obviously you should check out ours first. But in the UK, for example, that's a staple of their culture. It's the radio plays are on all the time. Yeah. But in America, there really haven't been too many of those since, before television.
Right, right. So, well, for our listeners who want to get into no television and stream the audio play, radio play, they can check
Mm.
that out. And you'll let us know where we can find that later on.
Mhm.
But I'm curious, for you, what does it mean to you to be creative?
Well, I mean, for me, I think it's a question of feeling an impulse to do something. When I think of being a playwright, it's something that I've been doing for a while now, and so to me, there's a uh, I wouldn't call it a workmanlike approach to it necessarily, but it's something that I've worked hard to develop a skill at,
Mhm.
and uh, so to me, the craft of it is at least as important as the creativity in a way. But to me, without what you wait for, what I wait for are the moments of creativity. Like where like the spark comes and I feel, oh, this is something that I get excited about telling, or talking about it, in terms of writing a play. But for me, it's about showing up every day, trying to find that creativity, and a little bit, a lot of it to me is a bit elusive, more days than not. Um, but I have to show up every day in order to, wait for that one moment where it feels exciting and fun when you're doing something. In my case, it's with language and characters, and where it's taking you someplace that's a little bit surprising that you didn't
Mm.
really know where you were going to go, or you thought it was heading in one direction, and all of a sudden, the characters sort of surprise you, and you realize, oh no, it's actually about this. It's heading in this direction. So that to me is real creativity, when you sort of get when your brain sort of steps out of the way, when your consciousness steps out of the way, and you don't get in your own way, and something comes through, and that to me is the best stuff.
Nice. Now, you were saying you kind of sometimes the sparks of creativity are few and far between, but you keep showing up. What
Mm.
does it look like for you to keep showing up? Do you have a set time that you write, or is there a
You
different
know,
process?
I don't really, and I know most writers do have a very specific thing, and
Yeah.
I think it's because I used to be a teacher, and at the same time I was a father of young children. They're grown up now, but so I couldn't afford to like have a ritual, where it was a certain time, and I just had to do whatever I could.
Mhm.
So when I'm working on something, I do it whenever and wherever, and often have become a little bit obsessive about it. So I'll write, you know, at my desk at home, and I'll write on the train, and I'll do wherever I do it wherever I can. I don't need certain conditions. I know there are writers who are, and they're great writers, but they'll need it. Well, it's got to be this hour, and the room has to be this temperature, and it has to have this tea to the right of me, and the barometric pressure has to be a certain amount, and then I can proceed. And for me, I just never had that luxury, so which I'm actually glad of, because
Yeah,
it allows me more room and more latitude to try and get something down.
absolutely. It sounds like your ability to be flexible with the situation that you're in and
Yeah,
still have those moments of creativity
yeah.
is really different for you than other writers.
Maybe, and it's not obviously it's not a question of writing better or worse. It's just what you're used to, I think. And
Right.
for me, I would argue that another synonym for creativity might be openness, and
Mm.
uh, that's sort of a piece with that to me. Is you never know where it's going to happen or where it's going to take you, and uh, if you try and regulate it too much, I think you really constrict it. I mean,
Yeah.
the regulation to me is, well, like in the case of a writer, the regulations were, that's for the editing, you know.
Mm.
But when you're just trying to express something, you can't be picky. You have to be open.
Yeah. Absolutely. You talked about being surprised by characters going in a different direction than you anticipated. I'm curious, what are some of your favorite surprises that you've had while writing?
Well, Yeah, I mean, like I've had I've written scenes, and suddenly I realized that that this one, I'm thinking one character, one couple of in particular, where I realized that they actually are divorced, and they hadn't, and that they have a very odd and problematic relationship to begin with, but one assumes that they are on reasonably good terms, and they are, but it didn't realize it was early in the process. But yeah, and then another time I had a character I realized that a character had been, without getting too specific because it's about it's one of the plays that's available on our YouTube page, uh,
Hmm.
but a character who has been harboring something that had really been weighing on him for years, and I hadn't fully realized that was the case.
Mm.
Now, once I discover something like that, you go back and you sort of reverse engineer some stuff.
Hmm.
Um, so, but yeah, so like my first draft is really just trying to figure out what the story is and who the characters are, sort of introduce myself to them,
Yeah,
and I mean that sounds a little precious, but I mean that's kind of what it is.
that makes sense. Get it all out and
Yeah,
meet these characters that show up and
right.
see
And
what
then figure out
stories they're in.
exactly. And I know of a lot of writers who say, well, this is the theme I'm going to explore, and then they and I don't ever, or I usually don't do that.
Hmm.
I usually don't think in terms of themes. I just think in terms of like there's just some little spark, a little idea, or it's usually a question. It comes in the form of a question, like just like Jeopardy, and it's usually the question is like a situation in which I would not know how I would react, or I'm not sure that there's a clear
Hmm.
way to do the right thing, or even describe what the right thing is.
Yeah.
So that is usually the starting point, and it has to sort of hit me if I really strain and struggle
Hmm.
to to sort of create it on my own, like just self-consciously come up with it. It usually doesn't happen that well for me. I have to sort of wait for it to sort of grab me, and sometimes that's like, for example, a real life story, which actually, the radio play actually is totally fictitious, but the kernel of inspiration was from a news story I read, and
Mm.
I wasn't looking for an inspiration. I wasn't combing through the papers looking to see something I could write about, but I
Yeah.
saw that, oh, that's a fascinating little conundrum, and so, and at that point, actually, I stopped following the news story because I didn't want to be writing a docudrama.
Right.
So, but it's things like that. It's usually the form of a question. And there are other writers who, like, for example, know before they put a word down, they know how it's going to end. They know exactly how it's going to. And it's not a question of I choose not to do that. I couldn't do that. I can't figure these things out before I've written it out. Uh,
Right.
and for me, if I know the whole story before I start writing it, it feels very sort of programmatic, and
Mm.
um, very inorganic, and
Yeah.
uh, and so it sort of doesn't allow room for creativity for me.
Right.
There are a lot of great writers who absolutely thrive in that circumstance, but there are a lot of writers who don't. Um, there's a famous playwright, Tom Stoppard, who once said, "Well, if I knew how my play ended, why would I bother to write it?" Uh, so
Fair. Totally fair. Yeah. Yeah, you were saying something about kind of if you're consciously trying to create or get it, it gets a little challenging.
mhm.
How do you navigate those moments when you catch yourself consciously trying to make something happen?
Good question. Well, I don't want to give the impression that I just sit around and wait for it to hit me, and if it's not feeling right, I won't type. I think, in fact, the opposite, that I have to try and I just sort of put my nose down and plow ahead, and
Yeah.
I go into a lot of cul-de-sacs, and then I check, my Facebook, and then
Right.
napping is a key part of my process. And it's sometimes, but a lot of the time it's just plowing ahead and trying it and thinking, no, that's not it. There's this great line by Samuel, a quote by Samuel Beckett, I think describing sort of the artistic process, and he says, "Always try, always fail. Uh, try again, fail better."
Feel better. Oh, I love it.
Yeah, and that's really the goal. And sometimes when it's not clicking, you walk away. I For me personally, and it's sort of, I don't want to say trick, but a methodology I try when I am stuck and I don't know where to go. I don't know how the story should proceed, and the characters are not telling me, so to speak. I will write it down I'll write it out like in a journal, like it's prose, like it's an essay about the story. Um, uh, Almost in, like, not literally, but maybe literal, I don't know, but sometimes in like third person, like, what am I trying to do, what do the characters want, and that's always the basic question in terms of writing any sort of dramatic stuff, whether it's a novel or a screenplay or what have you. I mean, the question always is always the same question: what does this character want? And what's preventing the character from getting that?
Right.
Those, I mean, that's just basic, dramatic writing 101 stuff. And sometimes, the simplest stuff is hardest to find, like you lose track of that. And so the journaling to me helps get me back to that thing. There's another quote that I'm thinking of, like from Van Gogh and his letter. God, it sounds so pretentious, but it just is apt. He's writing to his brother, and he at one point he writes how hard it is to be simple, and that to me is very true, because you want to sort of be a little bit more, not consciously, but you tend to sort of maybe be more ornate and decorative when you're writing stuff or creating stuff, and oftentimes it's okay. I mean, to me, oftentimes that part of the process is sort of adding all this sort of filigree and this ornate stuff, and then I need to do that for some stupid reason, and then I can, if I'm smart enough, I take most of that away. Um, so yeah, that to me. Gosh, I forget what the question was. I just
Getting through challenging moments of
Oh, there we go. Thank you.
overthinking or
Well,
over.
speaking of challenging moments, I think we're all experiencing one with me right now. But yes, so that's the way I approach it. Is I just try and figure out what is it I want and try and simplify it. So and sometimes I have to force myself to simplify it.
Right. Those are great reminders. The kind of slowing it down, making it simple. And what you were kind of saying in that third person prose writing in the journal, it reminded me of like taking a balcony view of a scene, or so you can see it from a distance and have a little space. But
and
great reminders.
And there are, and a lot of famous great creative people have done it very different ways, and the person I like, apparently Charlie Chaplin would like spend days in the editing room, like just leave, wouldn't sleep, when he couldn't figure something out. And apparently Buster Keaton, when he couldn't figure something out, he and the crew, he would take a crew out, and they would all play a game of baseball. And Keaton wouldn't think that much about the project. He'd try and focus on the game and playing and during the game, usually the idea would come to him. It's like one of those shower moments, right? I mean, they say that when you're not, when you can, again, it's to me a constant theme in my, Lord knows, in my life, but certainly creatively, it's get your thinking out of your, put it to the side. You're getting in your own way all the time by thinking, and the more you think about it, the harder it becomes to be free and loose and receptive to different ideas. This is why so many people talk about those moments in the shower, or like as they're about to drift off to sleep. Suddenly, something comes to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of the studies show that like 70% of people have these aha moments in the shower, or that time right before you fall asleep. And I think I love hearing the little tools that people use in their creative experience and creative process and getting over some hurdles. And I'm curious, So this is kind of adult life, but in childhood, what's your earliest memory of being creative?
Hmm. I think when I was in, I mean, I certainly hope I was creative earlier. I mean, I think the cliche is true about that everyone is sort of born an
Yeah.
artistic genius, and then eventually society squeezes that out of you with a crushing intensity and relentlessness. And so I think the first time I can remember really enjoying self-consciously being creative is when I was about, I'd say, in third grade. I'd write these stories, and it was, forget how it was related to school, but it was through school. I mean, it was the '70s, so I think we were all just sitting around in circles and pillows and talking about our feelings. And I think that so I was writing these stories, and they were mystery stories, and it was me and my friends. It was very it was very third gradish, but I really enjoyed that feeling of creating that. And then as time went on, um, I I got very into music, and so I for most of my teen years I wanted to be a songwriter and tried hard to be a songwriter. So it was always sort of there in the background in one form or another. But yeah, I think like writing those short stories when I was in like third grade, I think that was the first time I can remember it.
How fun to have those. Do you still have the mystery stories that you wrote?
No, they've been burned as part of an out of court settlement agreement. I can't go into details, but no, and I'm just thinking back on my childhood, and I moved around a lot as a kid, and I was an only child until I was 9, and so I moved around a lot. So I was always sort of in my head in like a sort of like playing these little games,
Yeah.
and creating these characters and creating these storylines because I really was alone a lot of the time, which and
Mhm.
I'm not saying that in a sort of self pitying way. It was just sort of the fact of the matter, and so.
Right.
I think looking back on it, that um, it was necessity, really.
Yeah. So, I mean, that makes a lot of sense that your imagination is allowed or asked to
Yeah, almost
be
forced. Like, yeah,
productive
right.
more than maybe other people because of
Mm,
the environment that you were in or the
mm.
situations that you were in. Yeah, makes a
Yeah,
lot
I
of
think that's true for a lot of people, don't you? In terms of like, I mean, I think very, maybe I'm wrong, and you have more experiences than I do, but I think very few people like discover at 25, oh, I want to be creative. Although I guess that happens. But I think a lot of people like from childhood, there's been something that's
yeah,
been rewarding in a very
yeah,
real way psychologically in sort of being creative, whether it's painting or what have you, but like it's channeling something and giving them
mhm,
something that they're missing in a lot of ways, and
right.
this is how they fill in the gaps.
Yeah, and or the childhood piece of things that brought them joy or enjoyment as adults they let go of, and now as adults want to rediscover
Right.
that or reclaim that part of
Yes.
their life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I think I'm sure for people who do discover it as adults, it's something that's been missing the whole time, and finally they
Mhm.
think, oh, this is it. So yes.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, being a playwright and writing for other people to perform your work
All
is,
right.
I'm really curious because I talked to someone who loved that process of writing and then having other people bring it to life.
Yeah. I love that too. That's actually my favorite part of it. And playwriting to me is the perfect ratio for my personality, in which because I need a fair amount of alone time.
Mhm.
And people are perfectly happy to give that to me, I've found. And uh but I also really love being collaborative in being
Yeah,
social. And so it's the right ratio, whereas a novelist is, they're it's just them toiling. And but the advantage of being a novelist is that once you've written your novel, for better or worse, that's the piece of work.
right.
Whereas with a play, once I've written the script, and of course, obviously, excluding rewriting and stuff, once I've written the script, I haven't written the play. I've written the script. I
Yeah.
mean, the play is an event, and the text is an event.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's generally in my favor, because if you're working with talented people, and I've been lucky in that I have many times, and
Mm-hmm.
a bunch of smart people in the room. A good actor is gonna make your work better, no matter how
Yeah.
well you think you've written something. A good actor is going to elevate it. There are certainly moments where there are actors who aren't doing it the way you envisioned, and it's driving you crazy, and you feel something isn't working, and so that can be a disadvantage. But I think I've benefited far more from actors than anything else. And also, when in a rehearsal room, if something isn't working, my default setting is that, well, I'm going to assume it's something wrong with the writing, because
Yeah.
by the way, a lot of the time I'm right. It's all the case. It isn't always the case, but I think as a writer, I think you have to assume, okay, it's my fault. Let me see how I
Mhm.
can fix it, because
Mhm.
otherwise, then you become a little bit. I've known a writer or two who sort of who is. It's easy to blame other people, right? It's just like in life, right? It's
Right.
easy to blame people, and I believe me, I do that all the time. But if you're in the room, it should be the best idea wins. And if something isn't working,
Mm.
it's in your best interest to figure out how to fix it. And
Right.
sometimes it's involving the acting and the direction, but I can't control the acting and direction. I can only control the writing. And so,
Right. So really exploring that collaborative process and being open, like you said, and
yeah,
willing to make adjustments to have it be the best it can be.
yeah, I'm not. Um, you know, certainly have more than my share of failings. But I think one of the things I'm pretty okay with, and I think most actors and nurses would tell you, so I'm not precious about my language most of the time. In other words, if they have something that they're like, well, uh, can we, this sounds weird in my mouth. Can I say it like this? I'm usually up for that.
Hmm.
I do tend to write with like hearing it sort of rhythmically in my head, and so
Yeah.
there are times when, for example, in uh, my scripts, there are lots of ums and ahs and ellipses and dashes,
Yeah.
and there are moments in which, or phrasings of things that are very rhythmic in my head, and so a lot of the time, if an actor's like, I'm not saying there, is that okay? I'll be like, yeah, that's fine. I don't care about that. But there are occasionally moments where I'm like, there are moments where I can be a bit ludicrous. And, I've actually given this note to an actor where I've said, well, um, you're playing that as an ellipses and I've written a dash. And so, I mean, which, it's just unbearable. And then
But it's
I,
part of the process, right?
yeah,
It is
but I mean,
that.
yeah, for me, I hear it a certain way, and that actually will help. And I've actually had actors say, "Actually, that makes sense to me now," because
Oh, yeah.
it's there's a difference in how well the character is thinking, and a dash implies the character's like in the middle of the thought, having a different thought. Ellipses implies a little bit more thoughtfulness, or
Yeah.
has, or whatever, reticence maybe, and so they aren't put in there willy nilly. I
Right.
really try and think it through. Having said that, if I was insisted that you have to do every single thing exactly letter and punctuation perfect, you're setting yourself up for disappointment, and also you're kind of insufferable. So you
Yeah.
need to.
People won't want to work with you as
No,
often if
no,
they
no,
had the
gosh,
choice. Yeah.
no, yeah,
So
no, exactly.
working with as many people, performers, directors, people in the creative field, I'm curious, coming across people who may not feel that they are creative, how would you encourage them to find creativity in their life?
Gosh, well, I think I guess I would push back a little bit with them and say that I promise you're creative. I mean, everyone every day is ad-libbing and improving every scene of their life. So you're finding creative solutions to things. Now, some of them are, cliched, right? And that's not a bad thing. It's like, oh, it's such a cliche to eat lunch at this time. But I mean,
Sure.
like you have to improvise every day. Uh, I'm not giving much away. I hope I don't like when we just joined up. You said, "Oh, it's been a long day," and so I'm sure that's consistent with many moments like, "Oh, what do I do now?" And you do something. So everything to me is, it's impossible to get through your day and not be creative in several ways. And so I think that to me is, and of course, in that moment, you're not thinking of it as being creative.
Right.
There's a wonderful moment in the sitcom 30 Rock. It's very early on, and Alec Baldwin plays this executive, and it's a very funny show. Anyway, and he's being videotaped, and suddenly he realizes, he suddenly says, he becomes very self-conscious and says, "I don't know what to do with my hands." And
Yeah.
I'm obsessed with his hands, and eventually they give him two coffee mugs to hold. Because
Yeah.
otherwise it's because once you start thinking about, oh gosh, where are my hands? Where do I put them when I'm talking? um then you get stuck in your head. And so obviously viewing it as, now I'm going to be, quote unquote creative, is probably
Yeah.
the wrong approach. just
Mhm.
sort of just sort of do whatever you want, go with the flow. And again, this is one of the themes that certainly I find useful for the way my mind works, is to just tell your mind to shut up a bit and just give yourself permission.
Yeah.
I mean, like my sort of mantra to myself as a writer is, be as forgiving of yourself and as humanly possible when you're writing, and then when you're editing, be as ruthless with yourself as you can be. But when you're actually doing it, just try not to think about it. Thinking to me is, this sounds strange, but in some ways thinking is like the opposite of creativity.
Yeah.
And of course, that's being very reductive in a lot of ways. But by that, I mean, if you're thinking creatively, that's great. But most of us start to freeze up when we become aware of the fact, oh, I am thinking creatively. Okay, well, now
Yeah.
what do I do now? Oh, now I'm thinking about that. So yeah, try as much as possible not to be intimidated by it, because everyone navigates their lives every day by making dozens of interesting creative decisions. They're just not aware of it.
Right. Absolutely. I love those reminders, and the being forgiving with yourself while you're doing it, and then ruthless with yourself while you're editing. I think
Yeah,
that those
yeah.
are really that distinction, I think, is helpful for people. So
Mm.
thank you for sharing that. And
Oh,
this
yeah,
has been
wow.
such a treat to chat with you. I just have one last question.
Yes.
What does it feel like in your body to be creative?
Well, in my body, to be creative. I think one of my many problems is that I am detached from my physicality in a way that is that is troubling. But
Mm.
I will say this: there have been moments where when I know something is worth writing about, it
Yeah.
is a physical reaction. I do
Mhm.
feel it physically, like on my skin, and in my stomach a little bit, and it's not quite, goose pimples, but it's something akin to that, and it's a pleasant sort of lightness and like an openness, and like, there it is. It's like when someone's giving you a massage, and like when you have a crick in your neck or something and giving you a massage, and then they hit the right spot, you're like, oh yes, that's the spot right there. It's like
Yeah.
suddenly, like it it's like a tuning fork, being like, it's suddenly the right moment, and it's harmonic. And so I do feel that in my body at that moment. Yeah.
Nice. I love it. Sounds like you have more connection to your physical body than you anticipated.
But maybe, who knows? Who knows? I can't
Well,
feel my hands right now, but yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
Well, thank you for taking the time to chat with me. If people want to learn more about your plays, the things that you're doing, where can they go to do that?
Thank you for allowing me the shameless plug. First of all, I'd love it if you would check out my theater company's page, which is www.newnormalrep.org, and that will lead you to our radio play, which is called Step 9, or you can go to any podcast platform, Spotify, iTunes, you name it, and it will. If you type in New Normal Rep and Step 9, the number 9 will take you right there. We have a YouTube page, which is New Normal Rep, which has a bunch of stuff, including a full production of our first play. And me personally, you can follow me on Twitter at Jack Canfora, and I do a lot of writing coaching as well. And my personal website is jackcanforawriter.com. So I'd hope you check all those out.
Perfect. I'll put them in show notes so people have easy access. And thank you again for taking the time to chat with me. It has been such a treat.
This is great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. We'd love to keep in touch, so follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We are at Sustaining Creativity. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Tag your friends and family so they can listen too. We love to hear from you, so leave your reviews, comments, and questions. Check out our website, sustainingcreativity.com, for upcoming offerings and creativity coaching. Tune in Tuesdays for our next episode. And remember, with creativity, anything's possible.